All right, welcome to Women in Science and Engineering on this cold, stormy day. The Women in Science and Engineering program here at Eastern Florida State College is committed to the recruitment, retention, and advancement of underrepresented groups pursuing careers in science and engineering. WiSE is open to all students. We offer things like seminar series with guest experts, which you are attending today, workshops on careers, resume building in graduate schools, networking for future schools, local excursions, career mentoring, and undergraduate research. These are the speakers that we've had this semester. This is our final speaker of the fall 2014 semester. You'll see in January our lineup for the spring 2015 semester. Today we have Dr. Hilary Swain, who's Executive Director of the Archbold Biological Station. And I encourage you to visit our website, which is www.easternflorida.edu/WiSE, that's WISE, to see recordings of previous seminars and workshops. To contact me, my name is Dr. Ashley Spring, and I teach biology here at the Melbourne campus. If you have interests that WiSE can help provide resources for, if you are interested in undergraduate research, if you are interested in providing things for other students, or have wants or needs for things within science, technology, engineering, and math. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Swain. So we'll just go to the picture. I'm not sure why this is not going big. YouTube? Yeah.
Bank of America, and by Cypress Cove.
Good. Okay. Apparently, morning, afternoon, everybody. Apparently, I'm marooned here and not allowed to leave this location. I love to wander around, but I'll just be stuck here. My name is Hilary Swain. I'm the director of a large non-profit and ecological research centre about 2 hours south of here, just west of Lake Okeechobee. I'll tell you a little bit about that later, but I thought we could start off today with an interview that I did last year, and it was the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, in our area in Southwest Florida, and they have a program on what they call Women Who Make Southwest Florida, and it sounded all a bit embarrassing to me, but because I don't really like to focus on that sort of stuff myself, but I thought it would be an interesting starting point. It's about 6 minutes, and then I'll start giving you a little bit more detail on my own background.
Tried to be more reflective and less responsive.
How are we going to get the volume
as time's going on? But, you know, one of the interesting things is people who get into leadership positions are often highly energetic and move very fast and forward. And then when they get in those leadership positions, they really do need to reflect and think about where they're going. So those two characteristics are a little bit in conflict with people who are very passionate. Reflective and less responsive as time's going on. But, you know, one of the interesting things is people who get into leadership positions are often highly energetic and move very fast and forward. And then when they get in those leadership positions, they really do need to reflect and think about where they're going. So those two characteristics are a little bit in conflict with people who are very passionate and very energetic. You know, patience isn't my strong point. Archbold does long-term ecological research and conservation and education. And we work in the area called the Northern Everglades, the land that drains into Lake Okeechobee, with an emphasis on ancient scrub dune system called the Lake Wales Ridge. We work on plants and animals, we work on water quality, we work on wildlife. And our overall goal is to conduct ecological research, inform conservation, and interpret nature for the people in our region. We're a large non-profit. We actually manage about 20,000 acres, and we have areas that are open to the public. So at our main headquarters at Archbold Biological Station, we've just finished a lovely new visitor centre specifically for the public to visit. And we have a new nature trail and lots of exhibits and information about wildlife, about the scrub habitats of the Lake Wales Ridge. We're a little bit of a hidden gem, or a sort of hidden treasure in the middle of Florida. We also run a full-scale working cattle ranch, so part of our operations is we have a 10,500 acre, 3,000 head cattle ranch. It's called the MacArthur Research Centre. And what we're doing there is we're actually trying to understand how do ecological patterns and environment and ecosystem work on working farms and ranches. We can't meet the challenges of protecting Florida unless we combine conservation on private lands with conservation on public lands. The two can work very well together. And if you look up your watersheds, if you look up the Peace River or you look up the Caloosahatchee, we are part of South Florida. Archbold goes up to nearly 220 feet, so we're a very high point in these watersheds. And it's a very different landscape from sort of coastal southwest Florida. You know, we're talking cattle ranching, we're talking interior scrubs, we're talking large orange groves, we're talking about very remote rural areas. But this is very much part of southwest Florida. We are, you know, the top end of the watershed. The Archbold does represent everything that I truly love. It represents great science, represents, you know, really active conservation, preserving and protecting sort of many of the rare species and communities. And it also represents a lot of education opportunities, everything from school children through to adults. I love what I do, so I don't need a whole bunch of extra hobbies to, you know, sort of balance my work, because my work is my hobby. We were able to raise our children at Archbold, so they spent a lot of time outside, and fortunately I live and work at the station. There were lots of students around who would, you know, could help me with babysitting if I had to go to meetings or travel. Juggle is the word, balance is never the right word, so you always seem to be out of balance and constantly juggling. When I was an undergraduate, I think I was one of 2 or 3 people out of 40 in my class who were female. And now when I look at undergraduate biology classes, they're 60–65% female. So there's no shortage of women coming into biology. And women are extremely competent and very good at all areas. I was looking around for a graduate program, and I applied to the British Antarctic Survey to be a research assistant on South Georgia Island down in the Antarctic. And I was very annoyed when I got the letter back. It said, "Dear Hilary Dow, I'm sorry you're not eligible to apply for this position because you're female." And I was very cross, and I called them up, and they said, "Well, we don't have any bathrooms down there for women." I was one of those very lucky young women who had a really supportive, active working mum, a very supportive working father, went to an all-girls school, and it had never even occurred to me that women did not play an important role in the workforce and would go out every morning and come home to a family in the evening. And we just had a sort of wonderful outdoor feral childhood where you were just outside all the time in nature, and I guess it was just very natural for me. In fact, I don't do very well in streets. I prefer to be outdoors and in nature. I don't think of legacies like tombstones or as plaques or memorials. I think much more in terms of living legacies. So for me, the living legacies of what I believe in for sort of Southwest Florida would be very much sort of captured in generations of students who've received training at Archbold and gone on to great careers, sort of land management that's been transformed, areas that have been acquired and protected for conservation.
Support from makers comes from...
Okay, how do I get out of this? Right. So, well, I could just go home now. I did it all. So I thought I'd maybe give a little bit more, rather than the video, give a little bit more quantified background as to what took me from when I was growing up to where I am now. And what were the really important things and the important people that helped me make that transition. And then share a few of those reflections with you. Because often what gets you ahead in life is not what you think gets you ahead in life. And I want you to really reflect on that. Or often you have to get the basics, but there's a lot more than just the basics. So sort of starting backwards, why isn't this doing this? It wouldn't. Okay. Well, we'll just wing it. Starting backwards, I started off doing a bachelor's in zoology. That's pretty unusual now. People don't do zoology and botany. They do sort of environmental biology or environmental sciences. And one thing I would say is that doing a basic degree in zoology was very important for me because it gave me what I would call a mother tongue. I was sort of expert in one area of biology. And I think that's true if you go into any discipline. Having a veneer of knowledge is great, but you need kind of that mother tongue of knowledge, something that you can go back to, that you really know a lot about. And something, you might be really interested in plants, you might be really interested in some kind of engineering structure, but something that you really have some in-depth expertise on. And you never stop learning about that. You never, when you start out doing a degree, that's just, maybe the second chapter in your life in terms of thinking about knowledge. The first chapter is what got you thinking about it, what got you engaged in it. And then you're continually learning. But having a deep mother tongue of knowledge about one area, one discipline is really important. And then gaining the sort of veneer of the breadth of knowledge helps on top of that. Why did I choose zoology? Well, I really love being outdoors. I love being in nature. My dad loved taking us out on hikes and walks. He wasn't a scientist, but we were always outdoors. And there was a wonderful moment when I was at high school, and we had to do this project where the teacher asked us to go out and do a plant transect, basically following, a quarter mile transect and looking at how plant populations changed over that quarter mile. And I set off and I measured it all out. And I actually took it in a place quite near my parents' house, and it was on a very steep hill, and it's actually a limestone geology. So it's actually quite interesting plants. And I'd always noticed all of the plants there. I'd always sort of, thought, oh, that's a really beautiful flower or something. But there was this marvelous moment when I went out and I took, described how you did it. You did percent cover and you stopped every so often and you took all the data down. And there was this wonderful sort of illuminating moment when I came back and actually had to sort of portray the data in a graph. And I remember thinking, wow, that's so totally cool. I've gone from just seeing things to actually being able to explain it to someone else in a way that they could understand what I was saying. It was sort of this light bulb moment where you went from I love being in nature to I can describe nature in a way that other scientists could appreciate and understand it. And from then onwards, I got really interested in the science of nature, not just being out in nature. How could I describe and understand nature? Now, it doesn't need to be biology. It could be anything else. You might have a cha-ching moment with chemistry or a cha-ching moment with physics. I think when you ask most people, they have those few little moments in their life, and you may not have had it yet, so it's okay. The few little moments of your life when suddenly something started to make sense, or it made sense why it was interesting. And if you haven't had that moment, can I encourage you to keep looking until you have that moment? Because that will be the point at which you turn around and think, this is worthwhile, this is interesting, I could really get into it. It's one of those, oh, it's all making sense now moments. So I went on and I did a PhD in zoology. I actually studied ducks. It's not because I love ducks. It's not because I'm a great duck hunter. It was one of those weird coincidences where I was on a ski lift I was on a ski lift, skiing in Scotland, and the guy who got on the ski lift next to me was just ended up being the regional guy for conservation in Scotland. And I got talking to him. And he obviously realised I was interested in more than just skiing. So by the time we got to the top of the chairlift, he said, "Oh, if you'd be interested in a summer job, why don't you come and speak with me?" So what I would always tell you is, always be prepared to talk to everybody you meet, because you never know when your next potential employer is sitting next to you. And it's often in the places you would never expect, like on the chairlift or something really different. And I went, and he said, "I got a project. You have to assess all of these lakes in this region." So I got this fantastic job this summer as an undergraduate. I'd wander around, cataloguing these lakes and collecting all data and information. And then one day I saw a tree hanging out over the lake, and I had a big nest box on it. I came back and said, "What are those nest boxes for?" And the person said, "Oh, they're trying to establish a breeding hole nesting duck in Scotland called a golden-eye duck. And they used to be here. There's sort of records for them, the historical record, but they're not here anymore. They must have been persecuted or hunted out." And I thought, "Oh, that's kind of neat." And I met the person doing this, the conservation person doing this. And I just got interested in them. And when it came to doing a PhD, I remember thinking, I'd really like to understand what it is about this duck that would enable it to spread in Scotland. What is it about the biology? And I wrote to this person in Sweden that apparently had done a lot of work. And he was a really grumpy old farmer. And he had been working, I think he would be okay with me saying he was a grumpy old farmer. And he had been collecting lots of data on golden-eye ducks on his farm for years. Every year he would go out, and he had about 100 nest boxes, and he would go out and he'd write down in Swedish how, he'd band the birds, what was the band of the bird, how many eggs, how many young, and he'd also wing tag the young. And he had one of the most amazing data sets on breeding waterfowl in Europe, actually in the world at that time. It was a 30-year data set. And I wrote to him and said, "I'm very interested in the behavior of golden-eye ducks. I'd like to come and study in the area where you're working." He said, "Oh, you're welcome." And I got there, and he said he was away, and he left this note. It was in Swedish. I wasn't very good at Swedish. And the note said, "While you're doing your work, please could you find these nest boxes and band the young." And there was a scruffy map left on the kitchen table. I've got all this stuff to do, and he wants me to find all these nest boxes. Anyway, I put a bit of effort in, and they were terrible. These nest boxes were way out in the middle of the forest, and they were out on floating bogs, and I had to wade to them. I had to find about 100 of them. I had so much to do. But I did eventually find them all, and I checked them all, and I banded all the ducks. And he came back about a month later, and he was very surprised that I'd found them. And within 2 months, he said to me, "I'd really enjoy working with you. I'd just like to hand over this 30-year data set, and we can publish all of these papers together." So you never know when you're going to hit the gold mine of science data. I mean, I hit one of the mother lodes of science data because I met a grumpy old farmer and managed to find all his nest boxes in the middle of the woods, and he hadn't given his data to anyone else. So I didn't realize at the time, of course, this was a test. This was his test, whether I deserved this. And he wasn't going to give me the data until I passed the test. So it's not really, this was not what I intended to do. It wasn't what I set out to do. I had my own science objectives, but there I was with one of the most valuable data sets on ornithology in Europe. Collected by a farmer who kept meticulous records, for 30 years on breeding birds in a wildlife area. The other story is serendipity can play a very big role in what you're doing. You don't always have. I never started off life when I was doing a bachelor's in zoology saying, "I'm going to work on waterfowl and publish really important papers on life history strategies of ducks." I never had that sort of vision. It's just that when the opportunities came up, I really tried to grab them when I could. And I didn't know what the tests were for them, but, it worked out really well. So I did that, and then I did something called a postdoc, a 2-year postdoc at the University of Aberdeen, where I continued working on birds. And I was at a cocktail party, well, not really a cocktail party, it was at a sort of bar, and someone said to me, what do you do? And there was the usual question that you had to sort of justify that you were working on ducks, which was never a very good opening conversation in any bar or party. So you work on ducks? And, you know, what use is that? I could say it in Scottish accent. What are you doing that for? No, was my money paying for that? And it did make me reflect on, you know, was the most important thing in my life to be publishing important papers, moving science forward? Or, you know, how could I connect with the everyday interests of people's lives and show them that science was valuable for what they were doing? So I took a different tack, and I decided not to go into academia. I decided I'm going to go and work for a conservation organisation. So I worked for the government conservation agency in Britain for 2 or 3 years. And it was a humbling and wonderful experience for me, because my job was to work with private landowners and tell them how to manage their land best for conservation. And I realized I had all this training and all these degrees. And when, you know, I went to meet a private landowner who may have a 200-acre woodland, and he wanted to tell him what is the best way I can extract timber from this woodland and yet honor biodiversity and maintain it over the long term, I was really very poorly equipped to answer that question, despite all the training I had, because there was a disconnect between people managing the land and people understanding science. There was a disconnect in how to move that forward. There's a much better connection now. Remember, this is the sort of Stone Ages of conservation biology, and I'm straight from the Stone Ages, but it did make me realize that, you know, you have to really think through what is the application of that. You know, is there an application, and how can you apply your data? How can you make them useful and valuable for society? So then my to-be husband applied for a job here in Melbourne, Florida Tech. And he got the job. So like, oh no, now what? So that was a difficult decision. It's a comfortable job, you know, had a career for life, doing a very interesting job. You know, do I give that all up to move to Florida? I have to say, not my number one destination target. You know, it wasn't a lifelong ambition to move to Florida. In fact, it was anything but a lifelong ambition. So I moved to Florida. And of course, you know, I didn't have a work permit. I wasn't illegal, but, you know, I mean, I wasn't allowed to work. You know, I had to wait, all of these other things. And my husband, whose name is Jeff Swain, he teaches in ocean engineering at Florida Tech. He was really busy because he was a new young assistant professor. And so I was kind of kicking my heels. And I thought, well, okay, I'm here, going to make the best of it. I'm going to learn a lot about Florida. And we had a big old Plymouth Duster, if any of you are into ancient cars. It was a big old sort of gas-guzzling car. And I just used to go off, you know, Tuesday through Thursday, and I went exploring Florida. I took 6 months, and I would just disappear midweek every week, and I would go to state parks, and I'd meet really interesting people. And I couldn't have been luckier, because, you know, to move to another country and to learn the biology is very tough unless you have this incredible luxury of time. If I'd started off life as an assistant professor from day one, I'd have never had that tremendous head start I had. And the reason that I did that is I really love nature. I really love being out in nature. You know, for me, the sort of sense of peace and calm when I'm out in the woods or going for a little hike, I'm really happy in nature. That's what makes me very content. So it was a perfect 6 months. I mean, of course, I was very frustrated. You know, what am I doing to my career? What on earth have I done? But at least I didn't stop watching soap operas. You know, I went off into nature and learned, you know, what I could, thinking I've got nothing to lose by this. So I guess the message for that, you know, I would share is never waste your time. Never waste your time. If you've got some dead time, go and do something with it. You know, you can always learn something. You know, seize every day. And eventually I started teaching as an adjunct professor, and I think I made my classes really popular and fun, and eventually got a position at Florida Tech. I was an assistant and then an associate professor. And I put a huge effort into it. I mean, I really worked hard. I really tried to engage my students, did everything from freshman biology to graduate evolution and conservation biology and behavioral ecology. So I had a lot of classes, a lot of experience. And a job came up. And a job came up at the nonprofit biological field station where I work. And they said they were looking for an executive director. And I might have been, I think I was like 38. And I called up and said, are you really serious? I mean, I said, I haven't got 20 papers in science and nature and, I haven't run a big organisation. And they said, well, what have you got to lose by applying? I thought, well, what do I have to lose by applying? And I wrote an application letter, and I argued that, I had a pretty good grounding and I had a very varied life experience, and all of life's experiences count. And to my amazement, I got an interview. And then, to my absolute amazement, and I'll give them a huge amount of credit, they gave a young, inexperienced, just recently tenured associate professor, a sort of plum of a job running one of the most prestigious biological field stations, or research stations in North America. And it showed tremendous confidence in my ability. I mean, in hindsight, they were very brave. And I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about the sort of things that I have to do for which I am almost eminently unqualified. On a daily basis, what I do is I have very little training and a lot of experiential knowledge and a lot of street skills that I use every day to get through my job. And of course, I need a PhD and I need science credentials, all those other things. I couldn't do the job without that. And I have the two important things. I love biology and I'm a trained scientist. Those are a given. But it's all those other things that really help me do my job as well as the two givens. So, okay, we're going to do this in some way. So Archibald is this wonderful place. You can go on our website. It's archibald-station.org, or just look up Archibald Biological Station on Google. And we build or generate and share the scientific knowledge. So we're scientists. We are conservationists needed to protect the life, lands, and waters of Florida's heartland. So the first thing, we manage 20,000 acres. That's actually a lot of land in 3 big divisions. One of the divisions is one of the most celebrated, the central one of the most celebrated nature preserves in Florida, in fact, in the country. This pristine Florida scrub habitat, 19 federally listed species. That's a lot of responsibility to manage that land. We also manage, as it said in the video, 10,500 acre cattle ranch. I had zero experience of running a cattle ranch other than I was actually raised in the middle of a farm. Not that my father was a farmer, but we were surrounded by a farm. And I did the hay every summer, and I could drive a tractor, and I could talk to farmers. And I think that was a big part of me getting that job. Not that I had a degree in agriculture, but that I could talk to a cowboy or I could talk to a farmer, and they would be happy to lean on a fence post and have a conversation with me. And that was really important. And then the other thing is a very big wetland restoration site. So just really, learning how to manage land and to manage wetlands. So again, the science credentials, the love of nature, but just management. We send out teams of people. This is the area we work. So sort of the lands north of Lake Okeechobee, the lands that drain south into Lake Okeechobee. And you can see where the station, this is where our main headquarters are, the beautiful pristine nature reserve. And then this is our working cattle ranch. And the yellow dots are all the other places where our team of staff, we have a staff of 50 work throughout the watershed. So as well as hundreds of visiting scientists and classes. So it's sort of like a place where everyone comes and then there's a diaspora of people going out to work. We also have a team working on the big Avon Park Air Force Range. So managing lots of people dispersed every day. We have very complicated facilities. So if you just look here, can you see my, yeah. So these are our big labs and research areas. These buildings are on the National Historic Register for something I had zero experience of, managing historic property. You know, one of the sites that's most important in Florida for historical construction, known throughout the country because it's built by the same great engineers that built the Brooklyn Bridge, so the Roebling family. And then, you know, we have a water treatment plant, we have a huge electrical distribution system, sewage, I mean, all of these things for which I am eminently unqualified to do. So I had to learn all about, you know, I've had to get grants to restore historic roofs, apply for National Register funding, all of those type of things. Over here is a new learning centre we just put up. I'm very proud to say, how many of you are sort of involved in green construction or interested in green buildings and sustainable buildings? Well, this is Florida's 11th, only the 11th LEED Platinum. That's the highest possible ranking for green buildings in Florida. We opened this, it's opened at the beginning of 2012. That was an enormous effort to learn enough about green construction and to fundraise, because of course you have to fundraise for the money to put up a new building. So again, of course, I have great people working for me that really, you know a lot about construction and know a lot about operations. But it still takes someone with leadership skills to get the money, to follow through, to make sure the construction meets all the criteria. It was, so managing facilities is something that you never think you're going to do. I've had to bring in more money for roofs, septic, power, buildings than I ever imagined that I would ever be writing. I've written far more grants about infrastructure than I ever have about science in the last 18 years. Just managing land, obviously managing cowboys for grazing, managing all of the risks associated with putting out prescribed fires. So prescribed fire is essential for maintaining Florida habitats. So that means you have to have teams of qualified people who are lighting these fires deliberately. The ecosystem requires burning. Obviously, we don't just rely on lightning or wildfire, so we do deliberate burns, but the risks and the oversight of doing that are very high. Doing lots of work on, my mouse go, just keep disappearing. Doing lots of work on hydrology and lots of work on controlling invasive species. So just understanding, sort of herbicides and other things to maintain undesirable invasive species in the ecosystem. Okay, if anybody sees the mouse, shout at me, 'cause it seems to have disappeared.
Hit the down button on the keyboard. See if
yeah. Okay. The mouse must be there because I'm floating around on it. Good. Just squeeze it up and down. Well, okay. Managing biodiversity, I really, it's one thing to be, sort of really care about species and really care about natural communities. It's a whole different thing when you're in charge of them. The viability of this species over the next 100 years may very well depend on how well you're managing your site. So one thing I worry about a lot is, are we doing a good job managing for these species? And will we, in 50 years' time, will people look back? Will they say, Hilary Swain provided great leadership, or Hilary Swain, had blinkers on and was not thinking about how to really manage things in order to protect species? So that's a tremendous responsibility, whether you get that right for future generations. Okay. Let's skip that. This is something that was really a bewildering challenge for me. One of the commonest requests for data we get at Archbold is for the weather data. Everybody wants the weather data. It doesn't matter what they're working on. They want the weather data because they want to know, over the last 4 years, this species seems to have flowered earlier. I want to look what the weather data were that was driving that. So you find yourself as the director of a field station, and it could also be a farm or another business or a nursery. You find yourself increasingly running these very complex technology networks. Okay, so we have, if you look at these maps, the dots are on the left is the station, on the right is the ranch. You don't need to worry about the colour of the dots, but every single one of those dots is an instrument in the field that is electronically collecting data or streaming data back to our central headquarters. So there are 53 streams of data coming in. We have 8 weather stations. 5 flux towers, like that thing on the top right there, that are measuring carbon fluxes in the atmosphere. We have lakes with buoys that are sending data out around the world every 15 minutes. So the technology involved in this, I mean, 20 years ago, we used to go out once a month, or maybe every day for the weather, and we'd write it down, and we'd put it in a little notebook, and then we'd put it in an Excel file, and if somebody called, we'd send them the Excel file. And now we just have this vast amount of data coming at us that needs to be checked every, 3 seconds, and then is supposed to be on the web in good shape, every 15 minutes. Well, that was a huge shift for me because, I'm not technology incompetent, but it's not my strength. But bringing in, it doesn't matter whether you're a farmer, it doesn't matter whether you're a building superintendent, it doesn't matter what you're in now. You have to be on the cutting edge of technology to do your job. You have to understand sensors, you have to understand streaming data. I can hardly think of a job where you're not having to be on the cutting edge of technology in a leadership position in order to effectively run an organization. So, and it's not just, can I run a computer? This is, do I understand how this sensor is working? Do I understand the radio technology to get it from here to there? Do I understand QA/QC, the data quality control, before I can distribute this? Do I understand data visualization on the web so that when someone's looking at the data, they understand what it looks like? These are enormous challenges for the new leadership, is to put together the teams that, move technology forward. You have to be a great storyteller. And one of the things that's really important, especially if you get into a leadership position, is your ability to tell great stories. I'm not going to go into this, but just to give you a little example, the 2 photos on the right here, the top one is a photo of a moth larvae. And those moth larvae actually specialize on the shells of gopher tortoises. That's what they eat to grow. Just like, your auntie might have described moths that ate her clothes in the closet when she was younger. These are in the clothes moth family, and they eat the shells of dead, not living, dead gopher tortoises that are flipped over and are lying in the sand. I mean, it's sort of extraordinary that something so specialized, its nearest relatives feed on the horns of ungulates, or big hoofed animals that are out on the African plains. But what I want to say is people listen to that and they go, really? So you have to have like hundreds of great stories, a story for everybody you meet that will make them think, God, I could never imagine something as weird as a moth that recycles turtles. And so you just build up these great stories that, aren't just about data, but that make people think, oh, that's interesting. One of the challenges of leadership is how you bring together knowledge. We're just doing a new strategic plan, and we have a wonderful plant ecologist. I really admire him. His name Eric Mingies. He's very well published. And, we were struggling with what is the big picture of what Archbold does. And, basically the big picture is we understand biodiversity, and we're looking at how to maintain natural processes or ecosystem processes. And he said to me, this is really hard, Hilary. So Eric is one of the brightest people I know. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you don't understand. You always get the big picture. I thought, oh, that's interesting. He works in his own little area, which is great, and he's really wonderful at it. But someone has to take all those buckets and synthesize them and say, what together does that mean? And that's quite a challenge, is that, this convergence of knowledge. Leading communities of people is very difficult. How to get them to work together, to take interdisciplinary approaches, that is a really difficult skill set, and increasingly difficult now because it's often teams of people that do science, not individuals. So that's a hard thing to work on. And then training the next generation. How do you get people to come in and be inspired by what they're doing and be well equipped to go out and, carry on and maybe get a career like mine, or maybe go into journalism, or maybe, lead a non-profit, or go into academia, or work for a bank on advising them in investments in Africa? How do you train people with that sort of great skill set that's really, beyond just the discipline? So I just sort of described to you a few of the things that I have to do on a daily basis, for which I would honestly say I am eminently unqualified. But I do need those two basics: passionate about what I do and, credible as a scientist. So I thought a little bit, what were the ingredients for success? What made a difference? And, I think back, and I went to college, or I went to university for an education and not for a job. When I entered university, I had no idea what job I was going to university for. I went to university to get an education. And because of that, you're much more open-minded about things. You're not so fixated. Second thing is, I did a subject that I really love. I really love biology. And you'll always do well at what you love. It might be chemistry, it might be astrophysics, but, it really pays to do what you love. If you don't love what you are doing at college, change or do something different, because you better have that gut passion about what you're doing to get you through all the other tough things you've got to do. What I loved about going to university for an education was I was trained to think like a scientist. Now, it might be think like an engineer or think like a scientist, but, that is such a great life skill. I don't care if you go off and work for a hedge fund. I don't care if you go off and work for NOAA. I don't care if you go off and work for a small farmer co-op in Washington State. The skills that you get thinking like a scientist are incredible life skills. Parents used to come to me when their kids were coming to Florida Tech, and they would be coming to do marine biology, and they'd all say to me, "Oh, how's she going to get a job in SeaWorld?" or "How's he going to get a job in SeaWorld?" And I would just go, "Oh, no." I just say, we're not training them for a job in SeaWorld. We're training them to be a scientist. That will be great no matter what they go into, because they'll be observant. Things will make sense. Science is such a lovely grounding because everything makes sense in relation to science. Things don't make, or at least they do to me. So, you end up being observant, analytical, logical, good compiler of facts and arguments. These are all great skills to have no matter what you end up doing. So, that combination of loving what you do and thinking like a scientist, knockout. Those are two important things to come out of college with: loving what you do and thinking like a scientist. And then just take chance. I told you a few little stories. Take chance of every little experience that walks in front of you. Just think, oh, yeah, that'll be interesting. They're going that way for the weekend. I'd like to go with them. That'd be fun to do it. Yeah, just do those things. You're always on a learning curve. There was a lot of serendipity. I recognize I had it incredibly lucky. I know that. I think, as I said in that film, it never even occurred to me that women didn't get up every day and go to work and be an eminent person in the community. But I was very lucky, and I know that. And, it's taken me many years to realize that the reason I succeeded was that I had a lot of good luck. And I had a working mum and a working dad. That's unusual. And they were both doctors. I want to tell you, they came from very poor backgrounds. One grandfather was a carpenter, and the other grandfather was a painter decorator. They were both struggling in rural Scotland. These were not well-off families. My dad came out of World War II and got the GI Bill and went to university. My mother got the Village Kids Scholarship to a famous boarding school in Scotland and got an incredible education. So she came from one of the poorest families in that little village. She was very bright. She won the scholarship and she went to one of the best schools in Scotland, and they encouraged her to go to university. So a lot of serendipity in their lives. And in many ways, I think of my parents as very they were like 30 or 40 years ahead of the time. They were both working. They really believed in education, and they're sort of more like my generation. They were a generation ahead of their time. The other thing about my father, and I have no idea where he got it from, if you look at his background, he just totally believed in women. He had the maximum respect for female colleagues. I have a sister and 2 brothers, and I don't think he thought an iota difference about me and my sister doing well as about our brothers. He had the same expectations for all of us. I have no idea where that came from. When my husband told us we were getting married, he said to Jeff was, "You should always marry a woman with earning potential." But I realized how lucky I was to have those head starts. And I do recognize that not everybody else had that. But that doesn't mean that you can't succeed. It just means I had a head start. And, I also had a lot of people who really believed in me. My department head here at Florida Tech really believed me and gave me a chance when I was here, just coming here, not having a permit. And he said, "Well, why don't you come in and teach, see how it works out?" The Archbold gave me a chance, even though I was very young and junior, to take that position. People really believed in me, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to tell you things I might ask you if you came to Archbold for an interview, and you could be anywhere else. So I might ask you, I was going to do these in order, but I've kind of had to spill the beans and put them all up. I'm going to, first of all, work out, do you know your stuff? I'm absolutely going to do it. I'm going to drill down and find out if you know your stuff. I mean, that's just the absolute given. And I'm going to skim over all that blah, 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 blah resume stuff, because everybody has, the resume that looks like the gold standard resume. And then I would ask you, just sort of, could you tell me one interesting thing in science that happened this last week that's outside your field that really impressed you? And you need to all be sitting there thinking frantically, what would I say? And the reason I would ask that is I'd want to know that you are curious, and you are thinking about other things other than just, I've built this perfect resume. Because you want people who can really, really curious about sort of broad spectrum. If you were coming for a biology degree, I might ask you, can you describe to me a plant that you pass every day on your way from home to school, and what's happening to it this week? And the reason I might ask you that is I want to know if you've been observant. I want to know that you're looking around. Now, if you were coming for an engineering or something, I might ask you something like, give me an example of green architecture that you pass every day from home to school and how you think it's effective. And the reason I want to do that is I really want to know that you're paying attention, that you're actually observing things. I'd ask you, I've got an Uncle Bob who's really kind of a pretty miserable science denier. Could you give me one sort of thorny science issue that you would like to try and explain to him why it's important and relevant for it? And how would you do it to Uncle Bob? How would you share that with Uncle Bob? And I'd want to know how good you are at communicating things to people who are, very, very resistant to learning new things. I'd ask you, have you ever worked in a team, and what did the team achieve? And what did you really learn from others on the team? And I'd ask that for all the really smart cookies who don't like to be in teams because they think it drags them down. Because that's not the way science works now, because you're in teams of very smart cookies and you need to work out how that pulls together. So, and there is always those humbling moments where there are other people on the team who think differently from you and have different perspectives. I have to make a big effort to hire people who are not like me. And the reason why is, of course, it is really comfortable to hire people like you, but they never challenge you. They always just think like you. It's like hiring a whole bunch of clones, and it's not actually good for the organization. You want diversities and views and people that will disagree with you and, challenge you. So that's really important. What did you learn from others on the team about yourself or about them? I like to ask people, can you give me an example of something in the last 3 or 4 months where you've taken something you've learned in one discipline and applied it to something completely different and found a new solution? Because I want to think, are you one of those synthetic people or people who can really make big jumps across areas? Because that's a very high level of understanding, applying principles you learn from one area to another. And finally, I'd take you on a drive, and I'd drive up to a gate, and I'd watch what you do. I'd watch, first of all, if you offer to jump out and open the gate. I'd offer if you know how to open the gate. I'd watch if you shut the gate behind you. I'd watch if you shut yourself on the wrong side of a gate, because those are very, very revealing things about people and, whether you could work at Archbold. Can you open a gate? There's, what I would call it, not the emotional IQ, not the intellectual IQ, but what I call the common sense IQ is really important. So, you can have some real brilliant people and they can't open a gate. And that's kind of a problem, because they're the people you're always having to rescue. Take it from me. So I think I was going to leave it there, and probably not left enough time for questions. But why don't we just open the floor, and you can just ask me any questions you want. Okay. So how many of you are in biology, just to help me out, think about it? Yeah. And how many are in engineering? Mm-hmm. And how many in sort of the physical sciences, like chemistry or physics? Or yeah. So, I'm sure a lot of what I said related more to biologists than the others, but maybe I should ask, what would the engineer, would one of the engineers sort of suggest to me something interesting I could ask you that would reveal whether you're an observant person or not? What would you ask someone coming to an interview to determine whether they were an observant engineer? I'm looking at you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you think about these things, thinking what you would ask other people is often an interesting way of revealing what you would answer yourself. So give it a little bit more thought on your drive home. See if you can think of an interesting engineering question you would ask someone. So how many of you have a clear idea of what you're wanting to do with your lives? Or how many of you are still thinking? So who's got the really clear idea? I know exactly what I want to do. So help me out. What do you think you're doing?
Like marine biology.
Uh-huh. Yeah. What about you?
Political science.
Oh, yeah.
And gene therapy growing food forest.
Uh-huh. Yeah, in the back. Yeah, the green. Oh, well, you need to talk to my husband. Yeah.
I'm leaning towards marine biology or conservation biology.
Uh-huh. And someone in the back.
Biology and conservation, and specifically applying it to younger kids so that they get that aha moment that makes them want to go into conservation.
So I'm going to ask the five of you who are, I'm going to ask you, what was the most interesting biology thing you've seen this week?
Like with me, probably say that saw a lot of spoonbills on a long road trip across the state.
Great. Good. What about you?
Flying over the parking lot.
Even better. I love it when non-biologists have great. Go on.
Not even in what I would get my field or anything like that, but just like the fact that we landed on that comet this week.
Uh-huh.
Really,
I would have really thought that was a great one for the first one. Yeah, and I'm hoping all of you are thinking that was a very cool out-of-subject experience. I'm going to ask the non-biologists in a minute. So.
Well, last week on Tuesday, I went to Sebastian Trails and just like doing things like that.
Uh-huh.
So this inspires me a little more.
Good.
At work, I actually got to see our first sheep crab swimming, and almost always buried under the sand, and they swim upside down, like passing water through their gills. So cool.
Very good. What about the non-biologists? Something interesting that you noticed this week in your sort of area of interest that you thought would be worth sharing with the group? Go ahead.
I saw on television, I think it was PBS, they had a show
beavers and how they are so important to the ecosystem and water. Because in California, they're using up all the water that's underground, and it's causing a lot of problems. And then they were showing this woman that looked, and they had this conservation going on, these scientists, and they found that the beavers, what they were doing was making the wetlands, and they were making it good for the environment. Because at one point, people try to get rid of beavers because they think they're disruptive.
Oh, they're very nice fur coats.
But in reality, they're very important to the ecosystem, and I just really thought that was cool.
Yeah, now I like that example, but what I was hoping for is something you'd seen with your own eyes, not something on the telly. So I'm going to try and find someone I haven't asked before. Yeah. Are you just waving your fingers? You were just waving your fingers, okay. Sorry. One of the non-biologists who saw something interesting or made an interesting observation in the past week that I thought was relevant to what they were doing. Yeah.
I was out in the water, surfing, and there's this huge moon jellyfish that have been out. And I noticed that when we get, because of the currents, when we get a cold storm coming, the jellyfish come closer to shore. And it's kind of interesting. Like when I see a lot of jellyfish, I'm like,
Good. So I'm still looking for a non-biology observation. Any of the engineers see something interesting this week that they were just driving around thinking, oh, that's cool? Yeah, sure.
and it was like right maybe like 5 feet away from where he was. It just stopped and stared at us. And we didn't do anything. It just stared. Like, and a bunch of people were walking by and stuff. And it wasn't like phased by it at all. It was probably like a bit, I don't know, like the island osprey.
Yeah, but you knew it was an osprey.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many of you have seen an osprey catch a fish? How many of you have heard an alligator bellow? How many have heard a coyote yipping? How many of you have seen a beautiful diatom down a microscope? Yeah.
Anyone in my class?
How many of you have, let me think about it, how many of you visited a green building and learnt about its design? Yeah. Okay, so you seem a very observant group, so I can't really end up with criticizing. I really end up with congratulating you on how observant you are. How many of you posted any of those things on your Facebook page? Good. So, one of the things is, do you share those? Someone who really cares about nature, that's what they actually share with their friends. So it's often an interesting observation, what people are posting. Well, probably most of you are doing Instagram and things, whatever else. But, what you share with your friends is actually very interesting.
Well, you don't know if we can open gates or not.
Who would be absolutely confident driving a big old four-wheel drive truck and opening what I would call a gap gate? You need to know what a gap gate is in front of me. Good. I don't know why you're getting these guys. A gap gate is one where, it's made of barbed wire and it sort of hangs up. And usually the cowboys put an incredibly tight wire around it, and it takes, just a certain knack or enormous physical strength to open it and shut it again. So what else do you want to ask me? I mean, it sounds like you're already halfway there.
I have about 1 more minute.
Right.
What's your favorite plant?
My favorite plant? I think I have got a particular respect for palmettos now. So I really love saw palmettos. And there's a little story behind that. Because first of all, they're everywhere and they're not very attractive. But the little story behind that is why I really love saw palmettos now. Is first of all, if you've ever lit a fire, they're fantastic because they totally go up. So that's, really good. But what we've learned about them in Archbold in the last 2 years is for 40 years we measured, the saw palmettos, the sort of long stem along the ground. We measured how fast they grew, and it was very slow, particularly at Archbold, where it's very poor soils, very poor nutrient soils. They grew about 1.5 centimeters a year, really slow on those big trunks, the things that look like alligator backs. And then along come, so we did that for 40 years, we know how much they're growing every year. And then along comes sequencing, sort of molecular DNA sequencing. So we're able to clip a leaf here, clip a leaf over there, clip a leaf over there, and actually say, this individual, where you're sitting, the leaf there is the same as the person away in the top back who's ignoring me. So we know you're the same individual because of the DNA sequence. So then we might be able to say, well, how old must this individual be at an absolute minimum if this is the same gene sequence here as there? So the absolute minimum would be half the difference between you. We've done, think of every chair in this room as being a leaf. What do you think the average age of the palmettos were in the plot that we measured? How old do you think they might be? 800. Anybody else? There's no prize for this, so anybody else has a guess? 60? Yeah. Need 2 more guesses. Somebody at the back. Well, a little bit unlikely since Florida was underwater then, so we're discounting that one. 200. The average age of the palmettos in our plots were 5,000 years old. And the oldest individual was somewhere in the region of 8,000 to 10,000 years old. And I went from thinking palmettos were cool to, just almost thinking they were worthy of, incredible status like redwoods and bristlecone pines. So you asked me which was my favorite plant. I've got a strong reverence for palmettos now. So, yeah, it was published in the end of 2011. The paper's by an impossible Japanese name and Abrahamson. It's Taika Wuburu. I can't remember the full name. It's so hard to say. It's on the age of palmettos. I think it was in Molecular Evolution. It's a very cool finding, though. Now, they may grow a little bit faster in better soils, but not that much faster. Yeah, it's a good story. Go ahead.
What story do you tell people that you think hasn't engaged people? Like all the little stories you use to grab people's attention? Is there one that's like, this story is my absolute best grabber?
Well, the palmetto one is right up there because people go from, trashing palmettos to thinking, oh dear, I've just bulldozed something that's 5,000 years old. So that is right up there. Depends a bit on the audience as well. So one of the good things, I never change facts, but I do change stories depending on who I'm talking to. People are very interested in our Florida scrub jay data, how old they live, how many young they have. They love the idea of long-term data. People are extremely interested in our lake data. The cores in our lake go back more than 40,000 years, so they're extremely interested that you can look at the cores from the bottom of the lake sediments and reconstruct Florida's climate, 20,000 years ago or 30,000 years ago. So it's often the things that people think that is really cool that gets them interested. People will say, we have to relate it to people's lives, but I've often found people just love cool stories. They really do. And especially if you can relate it to, something that they might have seen themselves. That makes it easy. The things people find very hard to understand is nutrient dynamics because they can't see them. Carbon dynamics is very hard to understand, very hard to convey to people. I have a few tricks for that, but that's a very hard one to convey.
Dr. Swain, one last question. Does Archbold offer college summer internships?
So we offer post-baccalaureate interns. And we offer them, and they are 6 to 12 months residential. So they're not summer interns. And I have to say they're very competitive. So we really get the cream of the crop. And the idea is it's a bit like a gap year between undergraduate and graduate. So if you want to get some experience, you're required to work work 20 hours a week, helping one of the programs, the avian program or the plant ecology program or the lake program, help one of them for 40 hours a week. You know, you really are the workforce. And then you're required to do, 20 hours a week, and then you're required to do your own independent research for the rest of the time. So we usually offer between 25 a year. And we've trained, I think, 460 students in that program over the years, and they've gone on to incredible careers. It is competitive, and it requires, like, if you want to work in the avian ecology program, you've got to have got some experience with birds. You can't. They're not interested in people with no skills. I mean, you've got to have some, basic skill sets to get those positions. The information's on our website. I always encourage anyone to look and apply for them. And I know they've been seminal experiences for many of those students. Have gone on to great things, not necessarily all academia. Some have gone on to very varied and interesting careers.
So it's something to keep on the forefront for the future.
Yeah.
Right? Thank you very much.
Yeah. I should say there are lots of other field stations and marine labs around the country. So if you're looking for internships, you should be looking under the Organisation of Biological Field Stations on the National Association of Marine Labs, because there's not just Archbold. There are, there's 160 field stations throughout the country, and many of them have internship opportunities. Ours is one of the best.
If you have any more questions, Dr. Spain will be up here. And thank you very much. Have a great day.
Did we get a ticket or something?
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming. I was yesterday, actually.
Oh, you are?